Hello, you're watching In the Cool of the Day. I am Tia Young, your host. Our special guests today are two very dynamic women who just happen to be sisters. Dr. Elizabeth Maddrey began writing stories as soon as she could form the letters properly and has never looked back. Her practical nature and love of math and organization steered her into computer science for college and graduate school. However, Dr. Maddrey has always had one or more stories in progress to occupy her free time. My second guest, Dr. Lynellen Perry, also mastered the field of computer science, and she has been a nonfiction writer and editor for over 20 years. Dr. Perry created a Christian book publishing company in 2000 and launched a fiction imprint in January 2013. Please join me in welcoming local Christian author Dr. Elizabeth Maddrey and local businesswoman Dr. Lynellen Perry. Hello, ladies. How are you?
Hi, Tia. Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for pulling away from your busy schedules to be here with us today.
Our pleasure.
Yeah. I'm going to start out with you, Dr. Perry, or may I call you Lynellen?
Lynellen would be great.
Is Lynellen okay? What about you?
Elizabeth.
Okay, Elizabeth,
yes,
okay,
please.
good. Lynellen, you are president of Chalfont House Publishing. Am I pronouncing that right? Chalfont?
Chalfont House.
Chalfont
right.
House Publishing.
Like Chantilly.
Okay.
We don't say Chantilly. Chalfont House, yeah.
Chalfont House Publishing. Tell us a little bit about your company.
It started as pretty much a platform for self-publishing. My mother and I were in Christian ministry, and we had written a great number of materials for training volunteers, for ministering directly to clients, and we wanted to be able to share those materials with others who were also in that same type of Christian ministry. So it made sense for us to have a formal organization to publish those and then be able to distribute them. So that's how we got started. It was just to publish our own material.
Right.
But then in 2003, we attended a writer's workshop where we met Wycliffe missionary Marilyn Laszlo. She was in Papua New Guinea for several decades translating the Bible into a native language there. And she wanted to write a book, a children's book, telling her story of what she had done in Papua New Guinea. And we hit it off, and Elizabeth helped write the book, and that was our first it's nonfiction, but it's our first children's book. It wasn't a ministry manual, it's our first other type of book that we published, and it was a gorgeous full-color book. And that same year then, I also brought on board an author who was a pastor and licensed family counselor, and I just loved his devotions. His book is called Daily Contentment with God by Howard Ford. He has a really wonderful way of taking the scripture and showing how to apply it to, in a really practical way, to our emotions, from everything from joy to anger, depression, and sadness.
Wow.
And they just really ministered to me, and I wanted to have his devotion shared with more people. Right. So after that, after getting a slow start, adding a couple authors, it just grew from there. And when I went to another writers' conference last year, 2012, finally decided it was time to add a fiction imprint to add on to grow the empire, add on to the nonfiction line and add some fiction. So,
right. Well, I was going to ask you that. I noticed that there were two names. There was the Chalfont, and then there was Hope Springs.
Right.
So I was trying to figure out the rationale behind that.
Right. Well, Chalfont House had been known for over a decade as a nonfiction publisher, mostly of ministry materials. And I wanted to have a new name for the fiction line, partly because Chalfont House, when people first see it, they have no idea how to pronounce it, so
right.
that's
like
hard.
Me.
Right, you're not alone. You are not alone at all, no. And the name doesn't really say anything. You don't know what we are when you just hear Chalfont House. In fact, people were very often confused. Is that a hotel, a halfway house?
Restaurant.
A restaurant, yeah. So people didn't know what it was, so I wanted a new name that would speak more directly to the message and the purpose of the fiction line, and something that was easier to pronounce, a little easier to remember, how to spell it. So on a long car trip, we brainstormed hundreds of ideas. And when we finally hit on Hope Springs, it just really grabbed us. And then we realized, there's a movie coming out with a similar title. What are we going to do? Are people going to think we're connected to that movie? But And so we debated that for hours, but nothing else grabbed us. So we stuck with it, and that's why there's two names, to give this fiction line its own identity that is more recognizable.
Right. Well, I think it's a great name. I think both of them are great names. Are you accepting submissions now?
Right. Both the Shelvon House nonfiction line and the fiction line Hope Springs Books are accepting submissions. For nonfiction, we're looking for materials that help Christians live out their faith, so that their faith isn't just something that happens on Sunday, but they have a more authentic walk with God. And for fiction, we are looking for stories who feature characters that are realistic. They have struggles, they're not perfect, and they have to grow significantly in their spirituality during the story.
Right. So. Well, I'll say amen to the part about Christians just being Christians on Sunday and not really living the life or even really following what the scriptures tell us to do. So that's really neat. I've often wondered about submitting to publishers because I'm always thinking by the time you get it, it should be near perfect. So are there other professionals or experts that writers should have look at their work before they send it to a publisher?
Well, definitely having something that's highly polished. My submission process asks for the first 3 chapters. So those first 3 chapters need to be really fantastically polished. And there are absolutely freelance editors. You need to have someone beyond the circle of family and friends that helped you get it to draft J. Then you need to go beyond that, because to somebody who doesn't have a worry about hurting your feelings when they're editing. So yes, the better it's polished, the easier it will be for a publishing house to give it the second look.
Right.
If it's really crummy coming in, I know how much work it's going to take to get it to be publishable, and sometimes I just don't have the resources to help that writer that much.
Well, differentiate between what you consider to be polished and just something crummy.
Well, obviously, punctuation, spelling. It's really surprising that we get submissions that have obvious spelling errors. And this day of instant spell check, it's really amazing that spelling errors are still there. Grammar, of course. The first 3 chapters, beyond just the basics of that, they need to have a real pop, a lot of energy, something really interesting where you identify with a character really
just
quickly.
Kind of grabs you.
You have to grab them really fast.
Yeah, I can understand that.
That kind of thing is that's beyond grammar. That's somebody who can help you structure the story.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about authors, debating about whether they should choose a small press or a large company. What do you say about that?
Well, the publishing world is changing really rapidly, and so there are a lot of resources that let people self-publish, go directly to the readers, and then there are a lot of small presses, and of course there are the major publishing houses. And each avenue has pros and cons. Some of the potential benefits of a small publisher are that you might be more likely to get some individual attention polishing your writing. A small house is not likely to have hundreds of authors that they're trying to handle at the same time, some of which are really big, well-known people that consume a lot of time because they're famous. So you might get more individual attention at a small house than you would at a large house. You might have more say in your book. The cover art, for example, at large houses, an author may have 0 input, no veto power over a cover. And Elizabeth has had a friend whose book came out and she just detested the cover, but as an author you can't say that in public, so you're just stuck with, oh, I love this cover, it's great. So
yeah, that's pretty tough.
But on the other hand, large publishing houses have a lot more money, possibly experts that are dedicated to just each piece rather than one person handling multiple pieces. So they have an expert just for grammar, an expert just for storyline, an expert for cover art, an expert for this, and a lot of different people have their input. Plus they all may have access to distribution in stores that smaller publishers don't yet have access to. So lots and lots of pros and cons to research which way you want to go.
Right. Well, Elizabeth has been sitting here so patiently, and I really want to know about Wisdom to Know, your first book, which I think was published through Hope Springs.
Correct.
Right?
It was our debut novel.
It was your debut novel. Tell us a little bit about Wisdom to Know.
Wisdom to Know is a contemporary romance, and it's a contemporary Christian romance, which means that it's not a bodice ripper. You're not going to find any bodice ripping in Christian romances typically. So, and I set it actually in the Metro DC area. And the main characters in the love story are Lydia Brown and Kevin McGregor. And Lydia is a pastor's daughter who is just sort of struggling to find her place and to measure up to her perceived requirements as a pastor's daughter. And she's also a little rebellious about that, so she ends up taking just about every wrong turn you can find. And she ends up pregnant. And
wow.
Yeah.
That's a big thing
Yeah.
for a Christian. I mean, sometimes you have to bite your tongue
Right.
to even say that word.
Right.
But yeah,
So
okay.
she ends up pregnant, not married, and she takes care of the problem quickly before she can think too hard about it. And then the guilt and the just sort of starts to destroy her life. Yeah. And Kevin has been in love with Lydia since high school, and doesn't really know what to do about it. They're good friends, but she has no interest whatsoever in him. And so he's trying to figure out, did God really tell me that this is the woman for me? Because he really feels that he did. And then as events unfold and things get going, both of them have to struggle to figure out how much grace, how much forgiveness do they really have.
Right. And then your second book, which I think debuted April 1st of this year, is Courage to Change.
Yes.
What about that one? Tell us a little bit
Courage
about that
to Change is another Christian romance, and still in the Metro DC area. And it is the story of Phil, Reed, and Allison Vassick, who are sub-characters in Wisdom to Know. And basically, they have a more traditional love story, a little bit of an office romance. They're working together on a case. They're both attorneys to help a young teenage girl who's pregnant. And the obstacles they're trying to figure out how to overcome is Phil's divorced and his ex-wife is loony. And Allison is 27 and single and a good girl. And just finding the balance between that and figuring out where you meet in the middle.
Right. Well, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to finish with that, because that sounds like something for a TV series, miniseries. We're going to take a short break right now, so don't touch that dial. We'll be right back with Dr. Elizabeth Maddrey and Dr. Lynellen Perry. Lynellen Perry. We'll see you soon.
Don't touch that dial. In the cool of the day, we'll be right back.
Hello, you are watching In the Cool of the Day. I'm your host, Tia Young, with our special guests, Dr. Lynellen Perry and Dr. Elizabeth Maddrey. Before the break, Elizabeth, you were telling us about Courage to Change, and you were getting to some really juicy stuff. So could you take up there?
Sure. Basically, I'm trying to remember what I ended with there. Phil's ex-wife.
Divorced?
Yeah, Phil's divorced, and his ex-wife, she left him because he found Christ. And they had sort of a hard partying lifestyle beforehand. And so when he cleaned up and turned his life around, she wanted nothing to do with it. And she was mad that he was no longer this person that she married. And Phil struggles with the fact, because he understands that point of view. When you marry someone, you don't expect them to do this 180 turn necessarily. You expect to be married to the person that you married.
Right.
But he also really, once he found Christ, he knew it was the best thing. And so he was really trying to get Brandy, that's the ex, to see that, to come to church, to experience it for herself. She just wanted nothing to do with it. But now, she comes in and out of his life. And so when she finds out that he's starting to date Allison, she sort of goes off the deep end, because she doesn't want him, but she doesn't want anybody else to have him.
Where have we heard that before?
So that's a little bit of the tension there as well.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That is, is there a personal story behind either one of your books?
Sort of. I grew up in the pro-life ministry. My mom was really actively involved in pro-life work for a long time. So, if you were really thinking about the 2 book descriptions, you notice there's, pregnancy and abortion, and Allison and Phil are working with a pregnant teen. So a lot of there's always seemed a little tie-in to a crisis pregnancy center and how they can help you. And so Lydia, the character of Wisdom to Know, she's sort of an amalgam of so many of the women that I saw helping my mom at that crisis pregnancy center who have had an abortion. I don't think most Christians realize that the statistics for Christians who have had abortions is not really that different from the statistics for non-Christians. It's just that Christians tend not to be as open about it as you'd expect, because they feel even more guilt and shame about what they've done than what other average women might feel. And so we don't tend to think that this is a problem that we have, but we do. It's in the church. And so Lydia is representing that woman who knows what she's doing is wrong and does it anyway, and then pushes it so far down to just within herself that she self-destructs and really can't put her finger on why. And then how does God break through that and get you to let him heal you? And that's a person that we saw over and over and over again at the center, and she's always been, it's someone I feel for. So that's where Lydia came from. Right. And then in Courage to Change, there's a girl, Lindsay, is the pregnant teen. And she's another person that we saw over and over and over again, a younger girl, pregnant by an older man.
Was he in the church?
No.
Okay.
No.
Sometimes
yeah.
that happens.
Yeah. Technically, it would be statutory rape, but because there was no authority or anything like that, nobody will press charges. Right. Nobody wants to do anything about it. And then, how does she process this? She doesn't want to have an abortion, but is she at a place at 17 where she can parent? Does she need to place for adoption? How do you process that? What's the right thing to do? Right. And so that's sort of, again, the personal story, that aspect of it. Wow,
that's very interesting. Have you had any feedback from the Christian community about your books? Because they're unique. They're a little different than what one would expect
they are
to read.
I've gotten some real good feedback. A number of people have said that they're pleased to see, they've termed it reality fiction. So I don't know if that's a recognized genre out there, but so, a lot of people are looking for the non-Little Ivory Tower Christian World book. And I'm one of those people. That's why I wrote the books that I did. It's because I look at what's mostly out there, and it's not, I don't want to read about a perfect world, because we don't live in a perfect world.
That's right.
I want to read about God working in the world I live in. And I've had a lot of feedback along those lines that they really appreciated the fact that I didn't shy away from the tougher topics.
Yeah, I remember one woman wrote that essentially you had written her sister's story, that she had never known that her sister went through this for years and years until decades later she found out that her sister had gone through this, and she said, this is almost exactly what my sister went through.
And she went through it pretty much by herself because of the shame and not wanting to.
Didn't tell anyone in her family, just self-destructed. No one could figure out why.
How do you choose the names for your characters? I've always wondered about that. You just throw up a spoon, however it comes down.
Usually, yeah, as I'm typing, I'll realize, okay, I have this character, and I'll start typing, and it's like, okay, I need a name, and I'll sit and think, and I'll type whatever name comes to me. And then you end up with a first draft where every female's character name starts with L, and every male character's name starts with K. That was the first draft of Wisdom to Know. And it's like, okay, that can't happen. People need an index card to try and keep them straight, so that's not gonna work. So then I'll go through and change the ones that I'm less attached to. Like Lydia and Kevin were Lydia and Kevin. I wasn't changing them. And then I still left Laura, who's Lydia's friend. So there's two L's, it gets a little confusing, but Matthew, Laura's husband, was originally Kyle, and I'm like, okay, I can't have Lydia, Kevin, Laura, and Kyle. That's just not gonna work. So, you know, so then I look at like the Social Security website of the names that were popular in the year that they would have been born and that kind of thing, and I look at the meanings of the name to see if there's something particular. Like in my third book that's coming out in September, Serenity to Accept, the main character is Jason, and he's a doctor, and Jason means healer. So that's one of the reasons that I'm going with that.
The fire of the anointing is on you. You're putting out another one. Well, I have purchased Wisdom to Know, and I'm in the process of reading it now, and I'm telling you, I usually do it in the evenings because, you know, when I'm in bed, because it kind of calms me down, even though it's really exciting and it's got a lot of real stuff in it. It's the characters. When I'm reading about it, I feel as if they're right there in that room with me. I'm able to feel what each one of them is talking about, and I think that is really to your credit. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
And it brings up another question. How do you get into the characters? How do you do that?
You know, I just sit down and write. For the longest time when I was working on, you know, with this goal of becoming a published author, I read all the books on how to write. And they tell you, you know, here's the interview sheet, and you go through and you ask your character all these questions. What's your favorite color? Where did you grow up? And you fill it all out. And I would create just pages of information for each character. I'd find magazines with pictures of what they would wear and what they looked like and all this stuff. And by the time I had everything filled out and put in a notebook, I was so tired of them, I wanted nothing to do with them. And so now I just sit down and write. I found that my creative process works better if I don't have all that planning, which is hilarious because every other aspect of my life I'm like, plan. But not with writing books. With writing books, I'm what's termed a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. Right. And that's how, and they just sort of develop.
Well, I'm really enjoying. I'm enjoying the book really a lot.
I'm glad.
The other, what valuable lessons do you want your readers to get from some of the current books that you are writing, or have written and are writing?
Basically, grace. That God's grace is bigger than anything you can do, and that, you know, even though we still have consequences for our sin, you know, we still are going to keep sinning, even though we try not to. God is there. And His grace is big enough for anything you can do.
Amen. That's really great. Now here's the other question, and you guys don't have to answer it if you don't want to. This is just me being a little picky here. Now, your sister is your publisher.
Yes.
How do you feel about it when she is editing your work and just taking that red pen or yellow pen and just, how do you guys get along? Is there any friction sometimes?
Sometimes, but I try really hard to remember that when I get that back from her that it's my editor, not my sister, and that she's working to make it better, because she wants me to succeed as much as I do, probably maybe more than I do. She's the pushy one. And you know, I try, sometimes I'll get her edits and I'll have to sit on them for a day before I look at them if I feel like I'm gonna get frustrated.
Especially when I preface it with, there's a lot of red ink.
Yeah, she doesn't sell it really well sometimes. No. I'll get them and I'm like, well, how was it? She's like, oh, there's a lot in there. And then I'm like, okay, I'll look at it tomorrow. Yeah, I'm not gonna look at it today.
So do you find yourself, Lynellen, being harder maybe on her than you would someone else? I mean, someone that's not. So you're right to the point, you know, this is...
She's a great editor.
I've been doing editing for long enough on all kinds of different work that I don't have. I can apply the same criteria to everything I do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what about your faith? How does that play into what you do? And I like to hear that answer from both of you from your individual perspectives.
I would say in the biggest way, probably with how my characters are in their faith. They don't have all the answers. They don't necessarily always feel like their prayers are being answered or heard even. You know, they're like you and me, and all that they're really hoping to see is that Christ is worth it at the end of the day. Right. You know, and I think that's what we all, you know, struggle with and want to find, is that at the end of the day, you know, that we did the right thing, we ran the race, you know, and
finish the course.
Exactly, right. You know, and that's really where it is I want people to have characters in books who are relatable, who don't do it all right the first, second, or even eighth time, but who still eventually learn and remember that God is there, because that's something that that I'm still doing every day.
All of us are.
Yeah.
Lynelle, what about you?
I would say that a focus for me in the publishing company is materials, how I got started, materials that help people heal from their wounds. I've had a lot of tough experiences in life and needed a lot of healing myself. So I want everything that I publish to have something practical to help people heal, because the world's tough.
It is.
And in the church is not necessarily a healing place. Sometimes we are worse to our church friends than we are to other people. So
That's
that
another whole show.
that's my main
We have to get back
focus.
together on that one, another whole show.
So that's my main focus, something
Right.
practical and healing to help people with their wounds.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, our time is up. I want to thank our dynamic guests, Dr. Elizabeth Maddrey and Dr. Lynellen Perry, for this great interview today. We invite you to join us for part 2 for more about their lives and a very special treat from the kitchen. If you have any questions or comments about this show, please email me at inthecooloftheday2013@gmail.com. If you have any questions for Dr. Maddrey or Dr. Perry, please take note of their information on your television screen as it scrolls. Thank you for watching In the Cool of the Day, and we will see you real soon. Bye-bye.